Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we'll be taking a look at the Intel low power gaming PC. Does it use much electricity? Let's find out. Okay, so in today's video we'll be taking a look at the Intel low power gaming PC. This is built around a 12th gen Intel processor using a micro ATX motherboard, as you can probably see, a moderately cost-effective case, and what I think is actually a relatively kind of common combination for most low-end gaming PCs. Now, when I started like this, the idea was to create a PC which was going to use as little energy as possible, but actually still not be absolutely useless at gaming. So I'll run through the parts. So we've got a Intel 12100 processor, Intel's i3 on the LGA 1700 socket. We've also got an ASUS H610 M.2 motherboard. Again, not a lot of frills on this one, so it isn't going to use a great deal of energy, and we don't have any overclocking options other than turning on XMP actually in the BIOS, so we're not going to be using any additional power, or there's not going to be any kind of additional load on the system. We have turned on APE3, which is basically ASUS's kind of performance enhancement, which does allow the processor to stretch its legs a little bit more and does actually stretch the kind of power limitations just very slightly. Not a great deal, but certainly does get a little bit of a boost. When it comes to RAM, we've got V-Color RAM, so we're using the Prism 2 RGB. Pretty much common RAM. Most people are going to be using RGB RAM, I feel, these days. So even though it has got RGB and that is going to be drawing a little bit of extra power, it isn't a great deal, but certainly I thought I'd make you aware of it. Graphics card wise, we've gone for something very low power and something actually relatively unpopular. So that is the Radeon RX 6500 XT. This is actually the ASUS dual fan model, and also does have a very small little bit of illumination on the side, which again doesn't really add to the overhead. It is a low power part and only requires a 6-pin PCI Express power connection. Case wise, as you can see, this is the new Gamemax Icon case. This is a micro ATX form factor case. We've got 4 included RGB fans, so I've left them in there. Although, obviously, depending on what case you go for, you could take those out of the loop altogether and reduce your energy overheads a little bit if you wanted to. But I think most people these days do like a splash of colour on their PC. When it comes to the power supply, so we've actually gone for a gold rated power supply. This is Gamemax's 750 watt RGB, which actually is a gold rated power supply, so we are looking at kind of peak efficiency somewhere in the region of about 90 to 92% efficiency, and generally above 80% throughout the entire range. Again, this does have a little bit of RGB on it, totally unnecessary because you can't really see it, but yeah, it is one of those things. So I've kind of made it try to be power efficient, but also kind of have those kind of gamery things which people do enjoy, such as RGB lighting effects and all that kind of stuff. And clearly, you don't need to have 4 fans in a PC, but it does help with the temperatures, of which the temperatures are really great in this system. It is a very low power one, and yeah, it could do with considerably less fans. To be honest with you, I could probably remove all the fans and it would still be absolutely fine. So in our testing, it's not the most scientific of testing, essentially. I've just got one of these kind of wall watt meters, so you just plug in your power supply into here, or your PC into here, and it gives you a readout on the screen in watts. So yeah, absolutely fine. So let's go through some of the results, some of which you may find interesting. And actually, I was surprised at how much power this actually does consume, considering it is low power parts. Now, it does say in Windows when we're using the system that basically in idle, the actual CPU can get down to something like 5 to 10 watts. And the graphics card itself does say on the screen that it's consuming something along the lines of 2 watts. So you would think with all those kind of things, like less than 20 watts in use just by the CPU and the graphics card, which are kind of the 2 core components, surprisingly, actually drawing from the wall, even at its lowest idle point, we are still looking around about 55 watts of power drain, which actually I was quite surprised with. And please do let me know in the comment section if that surprised you as well. I was thinking that it was going to be considerably less. On the desktop in average, normally we're looking at somewhere between 60 and 65 watts of power being pulled, and actually with the PC being turned off completely, there is still actually just 1 watt of power being drawn from this particular unit. So it does hover around anywhere between kind of 0.8 and also up to almost 2 watts. And that is because power supplies these days do have a 5-volt standby power waiting for the system to be turned on. And quite often you'll notice this, but if you look at the back of your motherboard when the PC is shut down, you'll probably see the illuminations on your Ethernet connection if you've got one, or possibly even some sort of standby LEDs on the motherboard. Obviously, if you want to turn it down to completely 0, then all you need to do is go around to the back of the PC and click on the switch, and that is it. It drops down to absolutely zero, and also it makes things a little bit quieter. So let's look at some other things when it comes to actually drawing power. So actually just installing games, I've taken some examples here of installing games in Steam, we were pulling anywhere between 100 and 120 watts. Now considering when the system is idle, we're looking at around about 55 to 60 watts, actually doubling that up just installing a game when all you're using essentially is your M.2 or SATA drives and some CPU processing power. That actually surprised me as well, over 100 watts just to install a game. Depending on obviously your internet connection and the drives you've got, that actually can shoot up considerably. And you can actually find that in terms of installing games, especially in Steam, you can get, with a very fast connection and very fast drives, you can get almost up to 100% CPU usage just installing a game, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. So now we're going to go through and take a look at some games that have been played. These are games, and also there are some benchmarks as well. We'll look at those at the end, just to give you an idea of what this system can draw, and also the frames per second you're likely to get whilst it's under those loads. So let's start off with CSGO, one of my favourites here. So actually playing this at a 1080p, we're getting 200 frames per second plus, and also spiking up to the kind of 300 or so at times. And we're looking at a draw of 195 watts, which actually isn't terrible, but certainly is a certain amount of wattage. Also looking at Rocket League, we're about the same there, so around about 185 watts, a little bit less there, and around about 160 frames per second as an average. Moving on to something a little bit more high-end, the Far Cry New Dawn. Now this actually does put a little bit of an extra load on the entire system, and as you can see from the wattage there, we're looking at 220 watts, and we're getting somewhere in the region of 110 frames per second. Moving on to Wreckfest, again a very similar kind of thing where there's a lot of graphical eye candy going on. Very similar results, in fact, 210 watts being drawn from the wall, and we're looking at 120 frames per second. So for games, that's pretty much expected. We are getting towards the kind of higher end of what this system will actually draw. But looking at benchmarks, which traditionally are going to put either an extreme load on either the CPU or also the GPU, let's take a look and see how those fare. So running 3D Mark, we are looking at 182 watts being drawn from the wall, so somewhere in the region of the same as Rocket League or CSGO, and actually we scored 5,118 points on this particular setup. Taking a look at Cinebench, so Cinebench is more CPU intensive than GPU intensive. So Cinebench, we were drawing only 134 watts from the wall, which surprised me actually, and we scored 8,380 points. So as you can see there, obviously CPU loads are going to be drawing less power than GPU loads. GPU loads do kind of spiral away, so if you have gotten a particularly high-end GPU, I think you'll be actually quite terrified actually how much energy you're using with it. But it does actually get quite terrifying when we run the two together. So running 3D Mark and also Cinebench at the same time, we're looking at 240 watts being drawn from the wall. Now again, this is effectively an energy efficient PC. We've got a very low TDP processor, which kind of does sit power and is quite energy efficient. And clearly the Radeon RX 6500 XT with its single 6-pin connection isn't going to be drawing a great deal. But certainly with both of them running 240 watts, is kind of similar to what we were getting with CSGO running at those super high frame rates. Now something else which you may want to consider when you're actually looking to build a PC and you're looking for a suitable power supply. Now clearly our power supply in here, 750 watts, is way above what is actually necessary, but it does give us a little bit of headroom for upgrading in the future. But when it comes to actually buying one, how do you know what you need? So there are actually applications or web-based apps which you can go onto, so places like Cooler Master and also Be Quiet both have applications or PSU calculators. I'll be linking these in the video description so you can check out what they think you should be using. I did find that the Be Quiet one was actually quite exaggerated and actually gave results way over and above what the system actually needs. I think with this particular system, I put it in the calculator and it came out as needing somewhere in a region of about 340 watts under full load, and therefore when you actually went to choose a power supply, normally they kind of double up. So I was being recommended to buy a 750 watt power supply, which again, obviously is completely unnecessary. Even with the worst efficiency in the world, having double those amounts of watts, this system under completely full load was using somewhere in the region of about 250 watts, 260 watts. So yeah, Do we necessarily need a 750 watt power supply? No, of course we don't. Somewhere around the 450 or 500 watts would be more than adequate and would still give you a little bit of headroom. So there you go, there are some of my findings when trying to build a low power PC. Please do get involved with this. I want to know what your results are. If you've got the opportunity, or you've got one of these lying around, or some other similar device, check your PC, plug this in to your PC and see what it's actually drawing. Now obviously if you've got a power block and you've got your monitor and all that connected as well, please do connect those up and give us your totals for all of them. Obviously your monitor is probably one of the least efficient parts of your PC build. Those generally have extremely low power efficiency ratings, especially if you go anywhere over kind of 100 or 144 frames per second on a monitor. Certainly the higher ones, 165, 240, are very, very poor when it comes to energy efficiency. So it comes down to the fact of, if you want to save money, what is the best thing to do? Well, buying a PC which is kind of like this, a relatively low-end one, obviously will give you some money back in terms of your investment. It isn't using a great deal of power. Clearly you can use consoles, which will probably use even less, which is something I will be testing as a follow-up. But realistically, do you need 100 frames per second or more in your games? Now, if you're playing competitively, of course, it makes complete sense. You want to have as many advantages as you possibly can. But for most casual games, do you actually need more than, say, 60 frames per second? For some people, turning on VSync or capping your system will actually give you a massive saving in electricity. But anyway, that is for you to decide which you prefer. Do you want the silky smooth graphics, or do you want a little bit of cash left in your pocket? Clearly, if you're paying the bill, then you're probably going to be on one side of the fence than the other. If you're living at home and your parents are paying the bill, then potentially frames per second are going to be far more important. Anyway, that's going to wrap this one up. Hopefully you found the information interesting, and I do strongly suggest getting one of these little adapters. Again, I'll link this in the video description as well. Plug one of these in and see what you're using. I think for some systems it will be terrifying, especially if you're using a 30 series graphics card and possibly a 8, 12 or 16 core processor, of which I will be testing very shortly on my video editing rig to see how much energy that thing is actually sucking back. Anyway, that's going to wrap this one up. I've been Mike, this is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.